Hello, welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is the weekend review show for September 20th through the 22nd, 2019. We have three new wide release openers that we're going to do deeper dives on here, and they're all in the top three. So that's easy. We'll also walk through the rest of the top 10, touch upon a couple of films that are outside the top 10. A wide release opened last weekend that is now 15. So we will talk about that movie. I think you know what it is. Once we get through that, we will see what's happening over the next few weeks at the box office. But let's dive right into the top 10. Number one this weekend, and I have egg all over my face on this one. Downton Abbey did $31 million this weekend in its opening weekend here in the US and Canada. Downton Abbey is, of course, a big TV show, historical period piece. Originally put out, I believe, by ITV over in the UK. Over here, it was broadcast by PBS 2010, 2015, if I'm getting my dates right. So it's been out of circulation, essentially, the TV show, for a good 4 years, which is why I very much downplayed the release of this film. I was like, whatever, who still wants to see a Downton Abbey movie? I have no sort of connection with the fan base whatsoever, clearly. But they certainly showed up for this film. So $31 million, where was this tracking? This was tracking, I think, in the high teens, low 20s. I don't even know if it was that high. It seemed more like a mid-teens tracking to me for this film. But I totally read this one wrong. And I think most people read this one wrong. I think the expectation for Downton Abbey was that it would be, you know, if it broke out, it would do like mid-20s, low 20s. The fact that it hit 30 and hit 31 here is pretty amazing. So let's walk through the sort of the basics on this film and see what critics thought and what audiences are thinking about this film. So right off the bat, pretty good Rotten Tomatoes score, 85%. The actual score, though, 69, is not super high. That kind of tells you that like critics enjoyed the film, but they weren't overly ecstatic about it. They found a lot of problems with it, which is why it has that 69 score, but most of them enjoyed it, which is why it has an 85% fresh score, which is a nuance to the Rotten Tomatoes system that like a lot of people just like, totally blow over just because it has that big percentage, 85%, but that's not really an 85 score out of 100. Top critics get even 89% fresh score, and a little bit lower actual score of 67. So same exact picture there with top critics. I was kind of wondering, like, how do they determine what a top critic is, Rotten Tomatoes? Is it like number of publications, the cloud of the publication? Like San Francisco Chronicle gets one, but like the Birmingham Post doesn't. I'm not sure how they do that. But there is a distinction there. Verified audience is insane. 96% verified audience fresh score. I mean, that's nuts. Actual score, even more insane. 94. All audience, very similar, 95% fresh score, 93 actual score. Cinema score of an A. No post-track scores on this one. I'm not sure why. Deadline usually pulls that information and posts it on the write-up, but they didn't have it this morning for Downton Abbey at least. So already we have a pretty good picture of the quality here. Critics are never going to be floored by this movie just because it's an extension of the TV series. You kind of have to know the TV series. That already is a strike against the film for being this high art masterpiece, which is why you see those scores in the 60s from critics. Now, the audience, the people who showed up to see this, the verified audience score of a 96%, that means the people who were engaged with this film, who showed up opening weekend, absolutely love it. That's not that surprising. What is surprising to me is how high these scores are. A 96% verified audience score, I mean, that should translate to an A+ cinema score. So audiences they're loving this. And I think it's less maybe the quality of the film, but just being in that narrative, imaginative universe of Downton Abbey. They just love being in it. And seeing it on the big screen just was a great experience for a lot of fans of the show. And apparently there's a lot more fans of the show than I even realized. Letterboxd score. This is sort of the film nerd, film Twitter types. I kind of count myself into that bubble. 70 out of 100, which is actually very good. Letterboxd score. Some comparables here on Letterboxd. Mary Queen of Scots, that came out last year? That was a weird movie because like it had all of this buzz. You had some really big names in it, but like it just sort of disappeared when we got to Oscar season last winter. It was very bizarre. But Mary Queen of Scots, 62 out of 100 on Letterboxd. Love and Friendship, I think, kind of relates, period piece, 68. And Ophelia, which came out last year with Daisy Ridley, is that her name? Yeah. That one just like, apparently nobody saw that movie. Like there was like all this buzz for it. There was like a great a poster for it, and then it just sort of disappeared. And that got a 62 out of 100, or sits at a 62 out of 100 on Letterboxd right now. So in terms of the quality, what we're looking at here, audiences who showed up loved it. Critics are kind of like, yeah, it's good, but it's not great. The film Vanguard, the film Twitter folks are kind of like, yeah, it's good. The ones that have seen it. So let's talk about production on this one. Only $20 million to produce this film. Which is, you know, you think about that, kind of makes sense because you have this built-in audience. I'm not sure what the marketing is going to be for something like this. You have this built-in audience. You probably have all of the stuff, the production design done already, or it's sitting in some warehouse in like North London. So you just got to pull it out and do it. So it's $20 million makes sense for this. It's also was probably not a huge bet here, right? I don't think that Focus Features who put this out, and also keep in mind, this is the best release ever for Focus Features, which has been around for 20 years. This is the first time they've ever hit $30 million in opening weekend. So lower production budget, marketing, I can't imagine was insanely high on this. So this is going to be a big, huge win for Focus Features. And I think ITV is also technically the producer or production studio here on Downton Abbey. There's an interesting poll quote that Deadline had from the Focus Features distribution head here. She's just quoting, it's kind of talking about how the audience really showed up for this. For audiences re-experiencing Downton, it's like coming together with their best friend from high school after not seeing them for 5 years. There's an amazing amount of love and comfort in seeing these characters on the big screen. We made it into a theatrical event. There were theaters that had tea parties, special menus. These fans wanted to be together with other fans. And I think that's Lisa Bunnell. I guess she's the head of Focus Features, at least the distribution side. That's a really interesting quote that Deadline got, because it makes a whole lot of sense. How do we get from a kind of quiet PBS show opening a movie 5 years after the TV show is done to $30 million? $30 million is nothing to scoff at. This movie beat Sylvester Stallone in Rambo, which is one of the most well-known film franchises ever. And then it also beat Brad Pitt in a very A-list, kind of high-concept science fiction movie. And it beat them pretty handedly by over $10 million each. So something really clicked here. Obviously, you know, who showed up for this? This is going to be older people. Over 45 was about 50%. Of the audience here. So definitely older people showed up for it. In terms of the ethnic racial breakdown, 72% white. What's normal? About 53%, 55%, somewhere in that range. So white people really over-indexed here. Latinos, African Americans were down a little bit compared to a normal audience. The Asian audience was a little bit up, but definitely it seemed like older white people were driving the $30 million for this movie over the weekend, which is not that surprising. The big question I have here about Downton Abbey and how it really caught me wrong-footed was how do you measure this audience? Because if you told me I know the show is super popular. I know that, you know, probably millions of people in the United States have seen it, but how do you get, you know, let's just do the math here. The average ticket price is what? $10 essentially, even though its opening weekend's probably higher than that. Okay, so let's translate $30 million over that. So that's 3 million people showed up to see this. So 3 million Americans in the US and Canada went out, paid, you know, $10, $15, whatever they paid to go see this. That's a big group of people to go out and get them to do the same thing over a 3-day period, right? That's a really big group of people. So I'm just sort of like, I'm kind of flabbergasted a little bit about how the performance of this film, just because it kind of seemed like something that you would do as like a special on like, I don't know, like throw up on a PBS special. Deadline brings up the fact that this seemed like a straight to streaming play, possibly maybe on ITV, then it comes over here on PBS. It's kind of a mystery to me. This one is baffling, which I love. And the bigger question too is then like, how is this going to perform with its legs? Super high audience scores, but isn't that just super front loaded with all the fans that love the TV show, and they're going to say they love it no matter what, unless it was completely horrible. I wonder if you did like a Dexter movie, like how the audience would react to that. Here's Dexter as a lumberjack in Oregon or something. I bet you the audience scores would be like 100% because people just want to see Dexter again. There's kind of this weird inflation with these scores when you have a TV show made into a movie. So I don't know how much I trust the audience scores in terms of relating to how the legs are going to do. Well, let's talk about that just briefly, where we think this thing's going to go. So it's at 31 right now. That's not actual. That is weekend estimates. We'll get the actuals tomorrow afternoon. So I think baseline, you have to say 3x. Like a normal film's about a 2.7x to 3x. So you're probably looking at $90 million here. But if I just, out of context, you said a film opened at $30 million, it has a verified audience score of 96. I'm saying at least 3x, probably more 3.5x. So this thing would be pushed into $100 million. But within the context of it being a TV movie made or TV show made into a movie, I kind of have to say it's going to go below 90. I would look for this thing to sort of cap out around 80 to 85. I just don't think it's going to have a 3x multiplier because all the fans came up to see this or went out to see it opening weekend, and they're not going to show up again unless they see it multiple times over and over again, which is a possibility. I don't know if this is like a Titanic situation. I just don't think there's enough general audience to push this over a 3x multiple into the 90 range. You could even see that effect. Early estimates Friday afternoon were saying $33 million, but then it got dropped to 31 because I'm sure the numbers looked like, oh, this thing's taken off, but it's going to be so front loaded with fans from the TV show that it's not going to have the legs that you think it's going to have. So that's why I think it's going to be around $85 million total take, a little bit under a 3x multiple. But at the end of the day, Focus Features is over the moon about this performance. This is one of the more surprising performances of the year at the box office, maybe the last couple of years. And it's not necessarily the aggregate amount. It's just the fact that you have this TV show that's been gone for 5 years. And let's be honest, it's not the flashiest TV show in the world. It also doesn't bring out young people. This is strictly an over 50-year-old, well, let's say maybe over 40-year-old TV show that got 3 million people to show up and pay $10 to $15 to go see it opening weekend. That's a pretty awesome feat. So, and Deadline brings this up as sort of like, oh, this is a play against, the criticism of the box office just being owned by Disney and these huge comic book popcorn movies. And like rightly so, that's an interesting point. But I think it has much more to do with the actual narrative universe of Downton Abbey itself that really engaged people here and got them to come out. So a phenomenal performance for Downton Abbey in its first weekend. Let's keep this train chugging. Number 2 was Ad Astra. To the Stars, I believe that means. It's in the opening of the movie. I saw this one. I had to. I'm a huge sci-fi fan. I love Brad Pitt too. I'm not gonna lie. He's fantastic. And so Ad Astra, 19.2 million, just edged out Rambo Last Blood, which was at 19.015 million. Again, this might switch tomorrow when actuals come in, but I think Ad Astra is still going to edge out Rambo here. This opened up in 3,500 theaters. Per theater average was $5,500, essentially right in that range. Let's talk about this performance and what critics thought about this one, because this is a really bizarre film. So this is 20th Century Fox, James Gray. He did Lost City of Z was his most recent film, which is also a really bizarre film because there was so much buzz about it, but like, did it ever get released? I felt like it was never released in theaters, but everybody was talking about it on Twitter and like film critics were bringing it up constantly. I'm like, who's seen this movie, number one? When did it come out? And why is there no collective memory of this from general audiences? Because I don't think anybody saw it besides like film nerds and film critics. But that was considered a pretty good movie. Ad Astra is a sort of a bigger stage for James Gray here. This one had a production budget pushing $100 million, greenlit for 80, but I think it cost over 100 with reshoots, says Deadline. 20th Century Fox film, major studio, now owned by Disney. So Disney was involved in releasing this and marketing this film. In terms of what critics actually thought about Ad Astra, 82% fresh from all critics on Rotten Tomatoes, 77 actual score. That's pretty good. Top critics loved this movie, 91% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, 78 actual score. So right away, you already have this. Critics really love it. I will also say that some critics, some very prominent critics, are ecstatic about this film. They are evangelical about this film, about how it's doing. And so that's, I think, sort of mixed the pot and muddied the waters about how good this film actually is, because a lot of people have been very vocal about how how they think it's a masterpiece, a new Blade Runner, a new 2001, something like that, some crazy stuff. Audiences hate this movie. They hate it. I was in basically a full audience. I always go to morning shows because it's cheaper. It was like 9:30 here in St. Louis to go see this movie. It was mostly older people in the audience. I think they hated it, to be honest with you, and that is sort of permeates out with the verified audience score here. Rotten Tomatoes 45%, horrific. 60 actual score. That's terrible. All audience similar. 43%, 56 actual score. Awful. Cinema score of a B-, not good. That's not as bad though as that 45% verified audience score, because that's horrific. I think I gave it like what, a 60 maybe on my Rotten Tomato score thing, because I did buy my ticket on Fandango. Post-track 50%, which mine was like right around 50, 60 was what I gave it. So I'm kind of in line a little bit with the general audience here, which is bizarre because I do consider myself kind of a film nerd, film snob type. And this seems like a movie that was made directly for this audience, or maybe even like the film Twitter audience. And that's how I always like, when I talk about Letterboxd, I always just assume it's just film Twitter people. And you think, oh, so what is film Twitter? Film Twitter is a group of people on Twitter, obviously, who are very into films, but more on sort of the artistic side. They tend to sort of champion different films that normally don't get a ton of love from general audiences. This is a movie tailor-made for them. It's very artistic. It's very slow. Like the flagship film for film Twitter, I think, is like Blade Runner 2049 and like Arrival. They all, I mean, they just like adore those films. And it's also like, it's kind of skews the film Twitter group kind of, it's global. People are from all over the place, but it definitely skews a little bit younger. So the average age is like maybe 23, 24. But I think they loved this film. A lot of them did. And you can see that Letterboxd score. The Letterboxd score is 76 out of 100. And so that's very high. It's definitely in line with critics. I would say that 76 is more like an 86 Rotten Tomato score. They gave Gravity a 72. Blade Runner is kind of this is Blade Runner 2049. Like I said, their flagship 82, which is essentially like the theoretical limit of a high score on Letterboxd. Arrival also 82. So that's why I said those two are the two peaks for film Twitter. I think Astra is going to go down as one of those films that they're really going to like. It's kind of going to be a culty film, it feels like. But the general audiences absolutely despise this film. And I can totally see why. It is beautiful. It's long. It's monotonous. For the fact that they go all over the universe or whatever, it doesn't feel like a lot happens. The story seems very flimsy. There's a lot of problems with it. I enjoyed it because it's beautiful and Brad Pitt's a really good actor. And it was just a very fascinating film, like how they told this story and where they went. But at the end of the day, if I'm viewing this from a general audience, this is like DOA film. Like there's no way the general audience is going to like this film. So I don't know what 20th Century Fox was thinking, or Brad Pitt was thinking, or James Gray. Like, people aren't going to like this. How do you not know that? How do you not go into a screening? I think this thing was test screened and it did terrible. So they went back and did test reshoots. And there's a big rumor going around on film Twitter, of course, that there's a huge movie coming out this fall that they had no idea how to market the thing and no idea what to do with it. And I think this was what they were talking about, was Ad Astra. So production was $100 million. Who showed up? 57% male, 43% female. That kind of makes sense. I thought it would be even higher male. 73% over 25, 27% under 25. Definitely an over index in the over 25 audience. 59% white was the audience, was a little bit higher than normal. 16% Latino, which is below normal. 14% Asian other, which is double what it normally is in terms of share of an audience. 11% African American was kind of normal to the average movie going audience. It's just, it's hard for me to understand why. I guess October is what? Space month for movies. We had Gravity, we had The Martian. I guess it's not October, but it's like that fall slot where they put out some space movie. Last year we had First Man, which didn't do very well, if you recall. It's bizarre to me that they would get all these people involved in this film, give it $100 million budget. Okay, $80 million if we're being technical, but they did spend over 100. And you come out with this product. Like, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. at the core of the film is this sort of quietness, and there's lots of long shots of pensive Brad Pitt looking off into the distance. And like, if this was like a Tom Ford film meant for like the ArcLight in LA or the Oriental in Milwaukee, like art house theaters, yeah, like I could totally see that working here. Cut the budget down to 20 million bucks maybe, and then you're in business. But like the fact that they spent 100 million on this and thought this was going to be a general audience film, that doesn't make any sense. And I can't imagine how people were involved with this and thought like, oh, this is fine. We're going to release an art house film, wide release with a huge marketing campaign, $100 million budget, and everything's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. I'm sure Brad Pitt had a lot of pushing this movie forward because he obviously is a star, but he's also producing it. But I think he's one of those actors who likes to make what we call higher art, more experimental films. And kind of he wants the masses to see them. It doesn't always work so well like this. So I think it's unfortunate. This thing is going to drop like a rock. It will disappear, at least a 50% drop next weekend, maybe 55, 60. I just do not see a wide release audience for this. I think it was a big mistake to spend this amount of money and push this thing out wide. This is like, if you're doing the sort of the quadrants of postmortems here, the product quality is sort of there. The marketing seemed to be pretty robust across the board, so I don't think it was a marketing problem. I think ultimately it's a product conception issue. There's no reason to make an art house film for $100 million and release it in the middle of September thinking that it's going to make $40 million opening weekend. That's not going to happen. So I think they started out on the wrong foot on this one. So that was number 2. Number 3 is Rambo Last Blood. Did 19.05 at the box office, just below Ad Astra. 3,600 theaters, or per theater average is about $5,250. This one, and Deadline kind of points this out, it's going to have a little bit better of a financial picture than Ad Astra. Production was 50. The marketing budget was also super low. They say under 30 is what Deadline's saying for Rambo. So that's great. Critics hated this film, 29% on Rotten Tomatoes, 40% actual score. Top critics, 10% on Rotten Tomatoes. Actual score were 29. Talk about, they just despise this film. Verified audience score off the charts. Well, not off the charts, pretty good. 85%, 86% actual score. That's people who showed up and saw this thing. All audiences, 87%, also an 87 actual score. Cinema score of a B. I really got to do a little study on the verified audience score versus cinema score, because sometimes it makes sense and then sometimes it doesn't. Because like an 85% seems like it's really high. Cinema score for B is not that great. I think the last one did like an A- or something. Post track was 70, which is pretty good. 56% definite recommend, which is pretty good too, kind of okay. Letterboxd gave this one. I don't even know what this guy. I didn't do Letterboxd for Rambo because I didn't think it was important. I don't care what Film Twitter thinks about Rambo. So this is a pretty good performance overall. It'll probably make. It's not gonna have a 3x. I'll tell you that much. So it's not gonna do 60. Maybe it does like 50ish at the box office. This actually also might be a more international film. Like the domestic US and Canada take might be like 30%. So it might be like one of those Fast and the Furious movies where it makes all its money overseas. But it sounds like from everything that I'm hearing, this thing is going to be profitable on this sort of opening weekend. And is this the last Rambo film? I don't know. This one looked fun. I thought the trailer was good. I can't believe they only spent $30 million. I think to market this thing, that's very low. Like for a wide release in the United States from a major studio, you're probably looking at like at least 45, 50. Normally for a blockbuster, now you're pushing 60, maybe even 70 for a huge movie. Like an MCU movie, you're pushing like 150 worldwide, 160 worldwide. It's just the marketing. That's not production. That's marketing only. So they did a really good job keeping the cost down here. This is just like bread and butter filmmaking for the masses. I mean, it really is. It's just take a big star, a known franchise, make the trailer look pretty interesting, and you got yourself, a cool $30 million, $40 million profit. So I think that's probably where this thing's going to end up. Okay, let's keep walking through the top 10. Number 4 was It Chapter 2, 17.2 million, a 56% drop. That's a pretty hefty drop. but it makes sense with Astra and Rambo coming out this weekend. Lost 400 theaters. Per theater average in its third weekend is $4,150. It now sits domestically at $180. Let's check out international. Let's do a little showdown with the original chapter 1 of it. So we are in the 17th day of release. That's today. Where does this sit versus It Chapter 1? It Chapter 1 was at 266 million right now. This is at 179. So way off. Not even close. Which I think what I was confused about with this movie is I originally thought that it wasn't going to do as well. And then I went back and I thought, well, there's a lot of hype. You're going to have a big front-loaded opening weekend that's going to be over $100 million. There was no doubt in my mind, like a day or two before release, that this thing was going to push up to the 110, 120 range again. But something happened where it's too long. The quality's not there. It's just not. And maybe the first one was lightning in the bottle. That's kind of what it felt like that year, 2017, when it came out. Just everybody was talking about it. This year, there's just a lot less hype and buzz with it. And I think it's doing pretty poorly compared to the first one. Now, is it going to lose money? No, this thing was shot for $70 million. It's going to be fine. It's also going to do pretty well internationally, I think. Where are we at internationally? It's basically 50-50 now, 179 both places. So it's 358, almost 359 worldwide. I'm going to have to see how it plays out. I'm not willing to make a final call on this one, but it's definitely, it's not going to lose money. It's definitely in the profitable range, it seems like. But it is kind of an underperformance within the context of the original film and the expectations. On paper, it's a win, but kind of the further you step back and kind of look at where this came from and what the original did, it's just underwhelming. You think this thing would easily open at 110 domestically and do 220 in its sleep, but it's just gonna struggle right now, and it's still struggling. I think a lot of it is it's too bloated. What's interesting about It Chapter 2 is it had all this built-in hype with the first movie. People loved the first movie. I hated the first It. I thought the first hour of Chapter 1 was great. The rest of it, I fell asleep. This is so boring and not scary. But I was definitely in the minority. A lot of, especially younger people, loved it and thought it was awesome. So you had It Chapter 2 coming out, you had that peak of hype. What happened though, I think, is the film quality was suspect and audiences didn't love it. And then you had the long run time, and it really blunted that wave of hype that this thing should have had. And it's too bad because they had a really big opportunity here to make, $250 million domestic movie here. It's not going to happen. But I don't think anybody's going to cry. It's still going to make money. It's huge for Warner Brothers' New Line. It's completely changed the horror genre for the next decade, hopefully. We're going to see big horror movie budgets, where before it was they'd cap out at $20 million, $30 million for a horror movie. Now we're pushing $70, $100 million for a horror movie. So that's pretty cool that it's changed the industry that much. But this performance this weekend's not very good. Okay, great. That was number 4. Number 5 was Hustlers, and it's second weekend? Yeah, second weekend, $17 million, 48% drop. That's a good drop. Not great drop though. I thought based on the critical reaction that Hustlers would drop 44 or 45%. But then when you look at the audience reactions, it's a little bit different. Let's see if that score's changed a bit for Hustlers, because I noticed there was a discrepancy between verified audience and critical score, where it seemed like the reaction was amazing, it's the best movie ever. But when you looked closely at the post-track and the Rotten Tomatoes score, it seemed like it wasn't doing as strong. And of course, Rotten Tomatoes blows up when I try to look at it. I'll take a look at that a little bit later. But I think it's an okay drop. It's gonna have a good performance. Why am I raining on this movie's parade? SDX is ecstatic about this. $62 million in its second weekend so far for Hustlers. It's gonna rival Bad Moms as the biggest SDX movie they've ever released. So it's a huge, huge win. Low production budget. I can't imagine the marketing was very high because they used the social media clout of all the stars to advertise the film. STX is going to be very happy with this performance, and they'll make a lot of money off of it. So is J-Lo. Not like she needs more money, but she's going to get it. Okay, so that was number 5 at the box office. Number 6, Lion King. How is this thing still around? 2.5 million, 29% drop. People are just showing up for this thing week after week. It's disgusting. 2,000 theaters, lost 400 theaters this weekend, $1,300 per theater average. It's at $537 million domestically alone. Total so far worldwide is 1.6 billion. This thing just printed money, essentially. It did have a $260 million production budget, but like that doesn't matter. Like this thing's gonna make like $300 million in profit alone. So that was number 6. That's 10th weekend, by the way. Number 7 was Good Boys. That one's still sticking around, 2.5 million, 40% drop. Lost 700 theaters. Per theater average is $1,200. That made $77 million so far. That's a really good performance for Good Boys. Number 8 was Angel Has Fallen. From Lionsgate, 46% drop. Lost 500 theaters. Per theater average just slipped below $1,000 in its 5th weekend. And now sits at 64, almost $65 million. I wonder how that one's doing internationally. Let's check that out real quick. Did 53 overseas, so it's at 118. I thought I would have a bigger international audience for that movie. But maybe it hasn't been released in a lot of markets yet. Finishing up the top 10 are Overcomer with 1.5 million. That sits at $31 million in its 5th weekend. I think that's a good performance, I guess. And it only cost $5 million to make. And I'm sure they just market it through churches and stuff like that. So I think that's probably a profitable film for Affirm, the like it's production studio, distributor, who knows? It's got the perfect name, Affirm. Number 10 was Fast and the Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw. That did 1.4 million, 48% drop. This one's still sticking around. 8th weekend. Sits at $170 million, which sounds okay because it had $200 million production budget. But when you look at international, it's a 23% domestic film. So it's done $579 million overseas. So it's at 750. That movie's fine. And we kind of called that early on that was going to be an international film as opposed to a domestic film. So that's the top 10. You notice I didn't mention a movie that we talked about last weekend, Goldfinch. The Goldfinch. Where is it? Teased at the beginning of the film. It's down at number 15. In its 2nd weekend, The Goldfinch has dropped 71%. 71%. That's like Freddy versus Jason. That's like a horror movie drop when it opened on like Halloween night and the next weekends in November. I mean, this is a horrific drop. It's so bad. $4.5 million. The per theater, this is insane. Like, I don't get it. It's like people went out of their way to hate on this movie. I don't know why. Per theater average, I'm not joking, $300 per theater in 2,500 theaters. That's like unheard ofly low. That's like lower than, there's like some, if you look on like Box Office Mojo, there's like the worst wide releases ever. I think $300 is like near the bottom of a per theater average, especially, I mean, certainly for an opening weekend, but for a 2nd weekend still. Wow. 4.5 million total so far, $45 million production budget. I don't know what happened here. You know, what's interesting to me, because you relate to two things. You like Goldfinch, you have a very successful book, built-in audience, right? You think they're going to show up. And then you have Downton Abbey, built-in audience TV show. You know, what's the difference here? Did the people who, and maybe it's the book thing, the people who read a book, I'm reading The Girl in the Window right now, or The Woman in the Window, whatever you call it. Very like quick read, very poppy fiction type stuff. Everybody I know is sort of, I blew through that book. It's great. It's fantastic. I mean, it's not very good. It's terrible. But it's like very engaging. I kind of wonder, that movie is supposed to come out this fall. I got kicked over to next spring, I believe. I wonder how that's going to do. Or Girl on the Train is kind of very similar. Do books not translate as well for like adult fiction, I guess you'd call it? But like period pieces on PBS are like catnip for old people. I don't know. It's just so bizarre that you have two very set fan bases that already exist for a story. One's hyper successful and the other one's like completely tailspins into the ground and is going to lose Warner Brothers tens of millions of dollars. It's just a fascinating juxtaposition there. Anything outside the top 10 to talk about besides the disaster that is Goldfinch? Brittany runs a marathon. They've pushed that over 1,000 theaters. This thing kind of capped out. I thought this thing had a chance. It doesn't anymore. It did $1,000 per theater in 1,000 theaters. That's just not, that's not going to do it. Made about $1 million this weekend. So it's at 5.3 million. I thought Amazon might have had a hit on their hands there, like a slow burn hit, but it's not going to happen, unfortunately. Anything else outside the top 10 to talk about? Where's my Roy Cohen? That's a documentary that opened up, was platformed in New York and Los Angeles, it looks like. Only did 10K per theater, so that's going nowhere. That's pretty much DOA. And that's kind of mostly it from the limited right now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks. This is a pretty eventful weekend for September. Next weekend's going to be pretty quiet. Abominable shows up from Universal. I like this film. I don't know why. I liked the trailer. It seems like a cool story. I think it's going to do pretty well. There's not a lot of stuff for children now. The Lion King. The Lion King is the only thing it's been out for 10 weeks and it's still doing okay. So there's been a kind of a famine here of children's films, and I think Abominable is going to fill that spot really well. I gotta look up what I thought that one was going to do, but I'm thinking probably 20s for that, 20 million, 25 million bucks. We'll see what I said if I can find it. So that's the only big movie coming out next weekend. What about not even really a lot of limited stuff either? You know what I realized this year is there's not a lot of horror movies coming out. There's a couple of them. There's not a huge one. Zombieland doesn't count because it's more of a comedy. You usually have one or two big horror movies, and maybe it scared everybody away in early September. There's not going to be a Halloween movie season because usually there is. Fall movie preview. I said $26 million for Abominable with a $90 million domestic run. I think that would be very strong for that film. So that's the only new wide release opening next week. Then we have Joker, which is just I don't know what to think anymore. Tracking's over $100 million, it looks like, for Joker. I said 80 million, closes out at 230. With a quiet weekend, the weekend before, the movies this weekend not doing super well in terms of the male audience at Astra and Rambo. Did okay, didn't break out though. I think Joker's just going to be, it's going to push well over to 100, 120, 130, maybe even higher than that. It's just going to be a very bizarre weekend. I'm nervous about it. I'm just worried something's going to happen in the theater. I'm not going to go see it opening weekend. I just don't. It's just there's the weirdest vibe around that movie, and I just it'd be exciting to follow box office wise, but I think culturally it makes me a little bit nervous. And then we're into I guess we're in the middle of October there. Addams Family, Gemini Man, Jexy. None of those seems like they're going to break out at all. Gemini Man, I think, is going to obviously underperform. We all know it's going to underperform. It's Paramount. It looks like a 1995 movie. I don't know what's going on, why I thought that would be a good idea, but I don't think it's going to do very well. Jexy might have a chance to break out. I'm nervous about I'm reluctant to say that because it's from Lionsgate, and Lionsgate always kind of has, it's what is the thing that Lionsgate is 80% of a wide release quality film, but it's missing that last 20%. I don't know if Jexy's going to translate over to audiences very well. Jay and Silent Bob reboot comes out on the 16th, I guess. But it's Phantom, whatever that sort of limited release event films company is doing that. I don't know if that's not going to make any money, let's be honest. Maleficent is on the 18th with Zombieland 2. God, this October is so weird. I just feel like Joker's going to drown all these other films out. I don't think Zombieland 2 is going to do very well. What do I have for a guess there? Let's take a look. I have a $21 million opening weekend for Zombieland. And then you're basically you have that last weekend before Halloween. A lot of random stuff coming out. Countdown, which looks so dumb for STX. I saw the trailer in front of, I think it was at Astra. Just awful. Looks so bad. Terrible horror film. Last Full Measure, The Current War. Black and Blue from Sony Screen Gems. I don't know. It's not a lot of big movies coming out. And then November is where things really start to take off. You got Terminator. Motherless Brooklyn looks okay. I can't believe they're pushing Motherless Brooklyn out wide. It seems more of an art film, or maybe even a Christmas release film. It's gonna be a weird October just because we don't have Halloween movie like we did last year. Next year we're gonna have, I think, 1 or 2 Halloween movies, or maybe they're doing 2020 and 2021. So that's gonna be cool. It's just this year I think Joker's gonna own October is what it feels like, and it's gonna make a ton of money. That's kind of what I see happening over the next month or so. In any event, folks, thanks for listening. This has been the Wildline Podcast. I will be back next weekend. Take care.